Imagine betraying the most feared man in Harlem, stealing his empire, sleeping peacefully for 11 long years, convincing yourself the past is buried forever, believing the streets forgot your name, believing time erased what you did. Now imagine believing you got away with it, believing the man you crossed would never return, believing prison walls buried his power, believing silence meant safety, believing betrayal had no consequences. Now, imagine sitting in a crowded restaurant, jazz playing softly in the background, 200 people eating, laughing, living their lives, and slowly realizing every single one of them is watching you, watching your hands shake, watching your breath shorten. Now imagine him sitting across from you, calm, silent, unblinking, the man you betrayed, the man you replaced, the man you thought was gone forever. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't threaten you, he doesn't even reach for a gun. He slowly slides a plate of ribs across the table, and he says one word, eat, because this is your last meal. June 10th, 1963, Small's Paradise, Table 7. This is the night Harlem remembered who really ran these streets. Marcus "Smooth" Henderson was never supposed to be the villain. He was supposed to be the heir, the one Bumpy Johnson trusted when the walls closed in. A sharp young hustler from Harlem who learned fast, listened closely, and moved smart. Bumpy didn't just give him opportunity. He gave him protection, gave him knowledge, gave him a name that opened doors and kept knives out of backs. When Bumpy Johnson went to prison, Harlem didn't collapse overnight. It adjusted, and Marcus Henderson adjusted the fastest. With Bumpy gone, Smooth stepped into the space that was left behind, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. At least that's how it started. He ran the numbers, collected the money, paid the right people, and for a while, everything stayed quiet. But silence has a way of changing men. Power tastes different when no one is watching, and Smooth wasn't just holding the throne warm anymore. He was sitting in it. 11 years passed. 11 years where Bumpy Johnson woke up behind steel doors. 11 years where Marcus Henderson slept in silk sheets, driving fine cars, wearing Italian suits, being called king in rooms where Bumpy's name used to command silence. The Italians noticed that shift before anyone else. The Genovese family didn't care about loyalty. They cared about control, and Smooth gave them exactly what they wanted. Names, locations, cash houses, policy banks, cops on the payroll. Everything Bumpy built brick by brick was handed over in exchange for permission. Permission to keep Harlem. Permission to stay rich. Permission to stay alive. That deal cut deeper than any gunshot ever could, because rivals were expected. Enemies were understood. But Marcus Henderson wasn't an enemy. He was family. He was the man Bumpy trusted to feed his wife when the money stopped coming in. The man who promised to keep the foundation standing. Instead, he sold the blueprint and claimed the house as his own. For 11 years, the letters stopped, the money stopped, the respect stopped, and in a concrete cell thousands of miles away, Bumpy Johnson counted days. Not with rage, not with panic, but with patience. Because betrayal like that doesn't demand revenge, it demands reckoning, and reckoning takes time. By the time Marcus Henderson realized what he'd done, it was already too late. Because while Smooth was building an empire on borrowed bones, Bumpy Johnson was planning every quiet night, every locked door, every passing year, 11 years of silence, 11 years of memory, 11 years leading to one table, one plate, and one word. June 7th, 1963, after 11 years behind concrete and steel, Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz. No crowd waiting, no reporters, no celebration, just a man stepping back into the world carrying everything he owned in a brown paper bag. He was 56 now. Grey threaded through his hair, lines cut deeper into his face, but his eyes were unchanged, cold, measured, still. The kind of eyes that didn't rush, didn't blink, didn't forget. Prison had taken years from his body. It hadn't taken a single inch from his presence. The paper bag mattered, not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. Humility forced by time, danger carried quietly. A reminder that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives looking small, worn, almost forgotten. Bumpy didn't look back at the prison, didn't pause for a final breath of freedom. He had already been free in his mind for years. The walls never owned him, they only delayed him. 11 years of waiting had sharpened something inside him, patience, control, certainty. The train ride back to New York took 3 days. 3 days of motion, 3 days of silence, 3 days of Harlem getting closer with every mile. Other passengers slept, talked, lived ordinary lives. Bumpy sat still, watching the window, replaying names, faces, promises broken and debts unpaid. When he arrived in New York, he didn't go home, didn't embrace his wife, didn't rest his bones after a decade of concrete beds. There would be time for that later. Right now, there was only one stop that mattered. Junie Bird's apartment on 145th Street. A man who never forgot, never switched sides, never stopped watching. Junie was waiting. He always was. When Bumpy stepped inside, there were no hugs, no speeches, no wasted words. "Give me names," Bumpy said, not sitting down, not removing his coat, not softening his voice, because kings don't return with noise, they return with purpose, and this one didn't come back to remember Harlem. He came back to reclaim it. Junie Bird had been waiting for this moment for 11 years, waiting without asking questions, without switching sides, without taking shortcuts. Age had bent his back and grayed his hair, but loyalty kept his spine straight. He didn't smile when Bumpy walked in, didn't rush to speak. He already knew why Bumpy was there. Junie reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not dramatic, not ceremonial, just prepared. He had spent 11 years watching Harlem move without its king, listening to whispers, tracking power, remembering who rose and who stayed quiet. This list wasn't written overnight. It was earned line by line. Names came first. Men who once stood in Bumpy's shadow, now walking in the sun. Men who expanded operations, bought homes, dressed better, spoke louder. Men who built wealth while Bumpy counted meals and days. Each name landed heavy, but none surprised him. Power always attracts opportunists. Bumpy listened without interruption, didn't react, didn't comment, just nodded slightly as each name was spoken. His face stayed calm, but something behind his eyes tightened. Not anger yet, disappointment, the kind that settles deeper than rage ever could. Then Junie said the name that changed the air in the room. Marcus Henderson. Smooth. The room went quieter somehow. Even the walls felt like they leaned in. Bumpy's jaw tightened just enough to notice. That was the line between patience and memory. Marcus Henderson wasn't just another name. He wasn't a rival. He wasn't a thief from the outside. He was chosen. Back in 1947, Bumpy had seen something in him, a sharp mind, a controlled hunger, a young man who listened more than he spoke. Bumpy taught him the numbers game, showed him how policy banks worked, introduced him to men whose names carried weight, protected him when revenge came looking. When Dutch Schultz's old crew wanted blood, it was Bumpy who stood between Marcus and the grave. When police pressure rose, it was Bumpy who redirected heat. Marcus didn't climb alone. He was lifted, step by step, lesson by lesson, trust by trust. And when Bumpy was arrested in 1952, Marcus was the one left standing, the one trusted to hold the structure together, to send money to Bumpy's wife, to keep the lights on. For 2 years, he did exactly that. Then the letters stopped, the money stopped, and loyalty quietly expired. That was the moment disappointment hardened into something colder, something sharper. Bumpy folded the list slowly, carefully, like a man putting away a map he no longer needed, because there was only one name left that mattered now, and Harlem was about to feel the weight of it. Small's Paradise wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was Marcus Henderson's throne room, a place where deals were understood without being spoken, where protection was paid for in advance, where respect was measured by who sat closest to table 7. The music played smooth, the food came hot, and the police stayed away. Every Friday night, without exception, Smooth arrived at exactly 9 p.m., like clockwork, like a man who believed time itself answered to him. Same table, same back corner, same crew surrounding him like armor. Harlem learned his routine the way cities learn the sound of church bells. Predictable, comforting, untouchable. Smooth sat like a king who had never lost a war, French cognac in his glass, the best ribs in New York on his plate, Italian suits that cost more than most men made in a year, diamond rings catching the light when he laughed, a gold watch ticking softly on his wrist, counting hours he believed belonged only to him. Outside, his empire stretched across Harlem, 40 men on payroll, 5 policy banks running numbers from basements and barber shops, collectors moving freely, cash flowing steady. The Genovese family's blessing sealed everything. As long as Smooth paid his weekly tribute, Harlem stayed his. At least that's what he believed. That comfort came easy to him. Too easy, because Smooth never felt the weight of iron doors closing, never learned how long nights feel when time has no meaning, never slept on concrete or counted meals by the sound of a guard's footsteps. While he dined in velvet booths, Bumpy Johnson learned patience in a place built to erase men. Smooth mistook silence for victory. He mistook absence for surrender. He believed 11 quiet years meant the past had accepted defeat, that Harlem had moved on, that the foundation beneath his throne belonged to him now. He forgot who laid those bricks, who bled for that territory, who taught him how to stand in rooms like this. And that was the irony. Every dollar Smooth spent, every laugh he shared, every Friday night he ruled Small's paradise, all of it rested on something borrowed, something unfinished, something that was already on its way back. Because kingdoms built on betrayal don't collapse loudly, they fall quietly, right on schedule, at exactly 9 p.m. Friday night in Harlem moved to its own rhythm. The streets were alive, neon lights buzzing, voices spilling out of doorways, music drifting through open windows, people dressed sharp, shaking off the weight of the week. For a few hours the city belonged to laughter, food and sound. Inside Small's paradise, the air was warm and heavy with comfort. Tables filled quickly, plates clattered, glasses clinked. The smell of fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread and ribs settled into the room like a promise. Waiters moved fast, smiling, balancing trays through tight spaces. This was Harlem at ease. In the corner, a 3-piece jazz combo tuned their instruments. Soft notes testing the room, a bass line murmuring, drums tapping lightly, not yet demanding attention, the piano waiting for the right moment to speak. It was the sound of anticipation without urgency. People talked business, talked sports, talked family. Hustlers leaned back like the night owed them something. Working folks counted tips and paychecks and decided tonight was worth it. Nothing felt dangerous, nothing felt unusual. The room breathed normalcy. At 8:50 p.m. the door opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for a shift to ripple through the room. Bumpy Johnson stepped inside. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man worn by time. A charcoal grey suit that had seen better days. Fabric creased from long travel, shoes scuffed and dull. No jewelry, no entourage, no visible weapon, just a man carrying himself like he belonged anywhere he stood. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Eyes lifted, forks paused mid-air. The music softened without anyone asking it to. People didn't stare openly. They glanced, then glanced again, trying to confirm what their instincts were telling them. Old-timers knew immediately, men who remembered another Harlem, a harder one, a quieter one. They leaned close and whispered names they hadn't said out loud in years. That's Bumpy Johnson. I thought he was dead. He got out of Alcatraz 3 days ago. Younger hustlers felt it without understanding it. They watched reactions instead of the man, watched shoulders stiffen, watched faces tighten, watched respect move through the room like a current. This wasn't fame. This was memory walking back into the present. Bumpy didn't rush, didn't scan the room nervously. He moved with calm purpose. Each step measured, each glance controlled, like a man who already knew where he was going, like a man who had waited a long time to arrive. By the time he reached the back of the room, the night had changed. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had. Because Harlem didn't need an announcement. It recognized its own. And somewhere nearby, Table 7 waited, unaware that routine was about to collide with history. At exactly 9:08 p.m. the front door opened again. Marcus Smooth Henderson walked in like he always did, laughing mid-sentence, surrounded by muscle, wearing confidence like it was stitched into his suit. Cream-colored fabric, burgundy tie, diamond rings catching light with every careless gesture. This was his hour, his room, his night. He took 3 steps inside before he saw him, before time stuttered, before memory hit harder than fear. Smooth's smile collapsed. The color drained from his face like someone pulled a plug. His laugh died in his throat. His body stopped. even though the rest of the room kept moving, because Bumpy Johnson was sitting there, calm, still, back to the wall, eyes forward, waiting, not hiding, not posturing, just present, like a fact that couldn't be argued with. Smooth's bodyguards noticed the change immediately. Hands shifted, jackets tightened, eyes followed Smooth's stare until they found Bumpy, and then instinct took over. Waistbands were checked, coats opened just enough. No words spoken, no signals given. Danger rose quietly from every table. The room felt it. Conversation froze. The jazz stopped mid-note like someone cut the air. Chairs creaked as people leaned back or slid lower. Waiters paused between steps. Plates hovered inches above tables. 200 people held their breath without knowing why. Bumpy didn't move, didn't reach, didn't react. He simply looked at Marcus Henderson the way men look at mistakes they made long ago, with familiarity, with certainty, with no urgency at all. Smooth tried to swallow, tried to think, tried to remember how this moment wasn't real, how this couldn't be happening. His guards waited for a command that never came, because Smooth already knew something they didn't. Then Bumpy spoke. Not loudly, not sharply. Just enough to carry. Just enough to own the room. "Marcus," he said, "come sit with me." It wasn't a request. It wasn't an invitation. It was a sentence being finished. One guard shifted forward on instinct, a thick-necked enforcer ready to act. Before he could speak, Junibird stood up behind the table. Old hands steady, a .45 resting natural in his grip. Not raised, not shaking, just ready. Other weapons appeared the same way truths do. Quietly, undeniably, a sword off from beneath the table, a revolver clearing a jacket line, angles locked, distances measured, no chaos, no panic, just control. Smooth understood then. This wasn't a hit. This wasn't a war. This was theater, and he was already on stage. "Tell your boys to go home," Bumpy said. Same calm voice, same empty eyes. "This conversation is between you and me." Smooth looked at the guns, looked at the faces, looked at the man he thought time had erased, and finally nodded. His voice barely worked when he spoke. "Go," he whispered. "All of you." And when the guards backed toward the door, Harlem stayed silent, because everyone in that room knew Table 7 was no longer Smooth's throne. It was his reckoning. Bumpy signaled the waiter with a small movement of his hand. The young man approached slowly, eyes fixed on the floor, hands trembling just enough to notice. Bumpy didn't look at him, didn't need to. "Bring us a plate of ribs," he said. "The good ones. And 2 glasses of bourbon." The waiter nodded and disappeared like he'd been released from a spell. The room stayed frozen. 200 people breathing quietly, watching a table like it was a courtroom. The kitchen stopped clanging. The jazz stayed silent. No one dared interrupt what was unfolding. This wasn't violence yet. This was judgment. When the food arrived, the ribs were steaming, sauce glistening under the lights. The smell filled the space between the two men. The waiter placed the plate down carefully, set the glasses beside it, and vanished. Bumpy reached forward and pushed the plate across the table. "Eat," he said. Smooth stared at the ribs, didn't reach, didn't blink. His hand shook as if the plate might bite back. "I'm not hungry," he whispered. "Bumpy, listen, I can explain." "Eat," Bumpy said again. Same tone, same calm. No pressure, no force, just certainty, because this is your last meal. That's when Smooth understood. This wasn't negotiation. This wasn't a deal. This wasn't a chance to talk his way out. This was the end of a long conversation that started 11 years ago. Smooth's voice cracked. Words tumbled out fast now. Excuses dressed up as reasons. Fear pretending to be logic. "You were gone," he said. "The Italians were moving in. They were taking everything. I had to survive." Bumpy listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. He waited until the words ran out on their own. Then he leaned forward just enough to close the distance. "You didn't survive," Bumpy said quietly. "You replaced me." Smooth shook his head, tears running freely now. "I was going to make it right," he said. "I was waiting for you to come home." "I've been home for 3 days," Bumpy replied. "You didn't come see me. Didn't send word, didn't send $1 to my wife to make up for 11 years of nothing. That landed harder than any threat." Smooth looked down at the table, at the ribs, at the truth he couldn't outrun. His breathing came short and sharp, like he was drowning in plain air. You gave them my policy banks, Bumpy continued. You gave them my collectors, my cash houses, my routes. He paused. Let the weight settle. You gave them my name. Smooth reached for the table like it might hold him up. I'll give it back, he pleaded. All of it. The money, the territory, everything. Bumpy shook his head slowly. Not angry, not cruel, just resolved. I don't want it back from you, he said. I'm taking it back from you. The plate of ribs sat untouched between them, steam fading, time passing, a last meal offered not for nourishment, but for understanding. Because this wasn't about hunger, it was about remembering what betrayal costs. Bumpy's hand moved slowly toward his waistband, not rushed, not dramatic. The room leaned forward without meaning to, every eye locked onto the motion, expecting steel shaped like a gun, expecting noise, expecting chaos. But what Bumpy pulled free wasn't a firearm. It was smaller, older, a straight razor folded thin and patient in his palm, the same razor he had carried since the 1930s, the kind of blade that doesn't shout, the kind that teaches. He unfolded it carefully, deliberately. The metal caught the light just enough to remind everyone what it was made for. This blade had history. It had opened enemies who thought power made them untouchable. It had carved respect into rooms where words failed. It wasn't a weapon of impulse, it was a signature. Smooth couldn't breathe. His eyes locked on the razor like it was alive. His legs trembled beneath him. Fear poured out of him now without resistance. This wasn't about dying. This was worse. This was about being remembered. You know what the Romans used to do to traitors, Bumpy said calmly. Not to threaten, to explain. They fed them first, let them understand what was coming. Then they punished them in front of everyone. He raised his voice just enough for the room to hear, not shouting, not performing, teaching. I'm not a Roman emperor, he said, but I am Harlem. The words settled heavy, final, unavoidable. Bumpy stepped closer, close enough for Smooth to smell him, to feel the weight of the moment press against his skin. Junie stood firm behind Smooth, gun steady, ensuring there would be no running, no interruptions, no mercy from movement. The razor rose, not toward the throat, not toward death, but toward the face, because death ends stories, marks begin them. In one clean motion, Bumpy drew the blade across Smooth's left cheek, quick, precise, controlled, just deep enough, just permanent enough. Blood followed the line like a signature finally signed. Smooth screamed, not from pain alone, but from understanding, because this wasn't execution, this was exile written into flesh. That's so you remember, Bumpy said quietly, every time you look in the mirror. He folded the razor closed, wiped it clean, returned it to his pocket like the lesson was complete. That scar tells the story now, he continued. It tells Harlem what happens when you betray your own. The room stayed silent, because everyone understood what they had just witnessed. A king doesn't always kill. Sometimes he marks. Sometimes he lets you live long enough to carry the warning. And that warning would walk Harlem for exactly 24 more hours. Bumpy didn't raise his voice, didn't rush the moment. He let the silence do the work, let the blood on Smooth's face speak for him. Then he leaned in just enough to make sure the words landed where they needed to. You've got 24 hours, Bumpy said calmly. Take whatever you can carry and leave Harlem. No emotion, no threat, just instruction. If I see you after tomorrow night, he continued, I won't be this generous. Smooth nodded violently, pain, fear, understanding colliding all at once. There was no arguing now, no bargaining, no pretending this could be undone. His kingdom had ended without a fight, without a gunshot, without a single man rushing forward to save him. Bumpy straightened and turned slowly, not to Smooth, but to the room, to the witnesses, to Harlem itself. 200 people frozen in place. Every hustler, every earner, every man who thought power could be borrowed without consequence. Some of you forgot, Bumpy said evenly, forgot who built this. His eyes moved across the room, not searching, claiming. Forgot whose streets these are. Forgot that respect isn't taken. It's earned. No one spoke. No one challenged him, because Harlem was listening now, really listening, the way it only listens when truth is undeniable. The rules haven't changed, Bumpy continued. Pay what you owe, keep your word, protect your people. Each sentence landed like a boundary drawn in stone. Anyone who wants to test me, he finished, you know where to find me. Then Bumpy Johnson turned away, not waiting for applause, not checking reactions. He walked toward the door the same way he walked into the room, measured, certain, finished. At 9:47 p.m., the door closed behind him, and just like that, the night reset itself. The jazz didn't start immediately. No one spoke, because everyone knew something had ended, and something older had returned. There was no war that followed, no bodies in the street, no chaos, because power had already been decided, and Harlem understood the message clearly. The king didn't need an army, he only needed to be seen. That night at Small's Paradise didn't end with sirens or headlines. It ended with silence, the kind of silence that settles into memory and refuses to leave. By morning, the story had already traveled every block in Harlem, from barbershops to backrooms, from numbers runners to men who thought the past had expired. Everyone heard the same thing. The king was back. Legends aren't built on violence alone. They're built on moments that teach, moments that reset the balance without spilling blood. Bumpy Johnson didn't reclaim Harlem with an army. He reclaimed it with presence, with memory, with the kind of authority that doesn't need to explain itself. That's what real power looks like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It waits. And when it arrives, the room adjusts. Fear makes men react. Respect makes them listen. And Harlem listened that night. Fear disappears when the threat is gone. Respect stays. It lingers. It reshapes behavior. It reminds people where lines are drawn and why they shouldn't cross them. Bumpy understood that better than anyone. That's why he didn't kill Marcus Henderson. Death would have ended the lesson. The scar made it permanent. You can lock a man up for 11 years, you can steal his money, you can even take his territory, but if he's a real king, you can never take his throne. Bumpy Johnson didn't make threats. He made promises, and Harlem never forgot it. Because real kings don't need crowns. They don't need speeches. They don't need permission. They need respect, earned through loyalty, intelligence, and the willingness to do what others won't when the moment demands it. That's why this story still lives. That's why it's still told. And that's why the name Bumpy Johnson still carries weight long after the streets changed. If you respect real power, real loyalty, and real history, subscribe. Drop a like if you understand that crowns aren't worn. They're earned. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done?